You're listening to The Paul Higgins Show, where ambitious tech consultants come to unlock their potential. After 18 years as a global leader, I launched several businesses, culminating in a successful exit. I'm sharing what I learned, plus what's working now from mentoring tech consultants. You will hear leaders within our industry to help you build a business you love that allows you to do what you want. If you are looking for immediate cash flow wins to fuel your growth, go to our free ebook at paulhigginsmentoring.com/roadmap. Imagine you've started your tech consulting business with the plan to exit at some point, and maybe 10 years into the future, but you don't really have all of your plans in place. Hi, I'm Paul from the Paul Higgins Show, and welcome to episode 565. In this podcast, I talk to Greg Poirier from CloudKettle about his plan to exit his business in 10 years, how it came true, and the exact steps he took. And it's really a masterclass in what you should do. You'll learn content was the key to his growth and how he gets all of his team to do it, his rules for exiting, and also a remuneration plan that gave a third of the company to his team, but it was the key ingredient to make sure that the business wasn't only about Greg. Greg is the founder and president of the CloudKettle, as I said, which was acquired by Bell this summer. Greg has been in the Salesforce ecosystem for over a decade. In 2010, he joined Radian 6, which was acquired by Salesforce, where he grew the digital marketing team. After Salesforce, he was recruited to build the sales and marketing engines for a number of startups. That's where he got a lot of his ideas on how to successfully exit. And now he's in his 10th year at CloudKettle. It's a Salesforce Summit Platinum partner that specialises in servicing enterprises with complex compliance, regulatory, and security needs. If you'd like to see both Greg and I on video, just go to Paul Higgins Mentoring, our YouTube channel. And now I'll hand you over Greg Poirier from CloudKettle.com. Fantastic to have you here, Greg.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm very excited about this conversation. You've had quite a wonderful journey, and we sort of summarise some of that in the bio. But why don't we kick off with who are your ideal clients now and what problems you love to solve for them?
CloudKettle's fairly niche in the Salesforce ecosystem in that we focus on larger enterprises. Most of our clients are publicly traded, or they are large enough to be publicly traded, but have chosen because they're a family enterprise, perhaps not to be, or they're very large, but not publicly traded. And government is the most common example of that for us. And generally speaking, if we look at that umbrella, in that, hey, there's many publicly traded or very large government and similar organizations in the world. We primarily specialize in those that are highly regulated, high compliance, have high security concerns. Utilities, telcos, financial services, and government. And then there's also ones that are adjacent to those. So what I mean by that is we may work with healthcare providers. Obviously, they're regulated and they have a lot of compliance concerns. But also some of our clients are health tech companies, very large, very sophisticated operations, but they technically are not regulated, generally speaking. Their client base is so regulated that they're regulated adjacent. They are regulated by proxy. And our fintech clients would be in a similar position as well. So it's very much in that group of organizations who have incredibly specialized concerns with regards to compliance to data residency, concerns about where data is hosted because they're a government, perhaps, concerns about overall security because of the type of business they're in. They can be the target of state-sponsored attacks. There's a lot that goes into that, but that's the space that we specialize and play in.
Right. And what are some of the problems that you help them solve?
I mean, there's all the usual problems that a company would want to solve with the Salesforce ecosystem. So we want to increase pipeline. We want to increase our conversion rate of that pipeline. We want to reduce churn. We want to, increase our close rate. We want to do all those things. We want to service our customers better as a result of having a really amazing customer case support process, et cetera. There is all that stuff. But within that, it's how do we make that more secure? How do we take the amazing security that's built into Salesforce's platforms by default, and how do we extend that and make that even better? How do we encrypt that? How do we ensure that when the data leaves that ecosystem and moves into a third-party integration like Snowflake, that it's still secure? How do we ensure that yes, we're compliant with EU GDPR and other similar compliance concerns around whether we have the right to contact you or not, but extend that to other platforms within that company's ecosystem that may also contact people that are not within the Salesforce platform. So it's a lot of work like that. How do we encrypt the data as it moves in and out of the platform and so on?
Yeah. And has there been an increase in breaches in the markets that you work in, which I know you live in Canada, but you service?
I mean, most of our clients servicing large publicly traded companies tend to be more US centric. There's a couple of things that have changed. One is obviously the regulatory ecosystem around a lot of this stuff has become significantly tighter. The EU is obviously doing a lot of work there. California's got new legislation, New York as well, Chicago's looking at it. There's that complexity. There's a lot more stringency around financial rules and certain items related to that. Additionally, though, there is just what is happening with the number of breaches that are happening across enterprises, generally speaking. And these breaches, it's not that there's an uptick in breaches in the Salesforce ecosystem. It's that the result of the number of breaches that are happening to these companies, more broadly speaking, across their technology platforms, and the number of lawsuits that are resulting in the huge fines and penalties they're paying as a result of a breach, but also maybe as the result of not being compliant with a know your customer policy if you're in financial services, or not being compliant with an email privacy policy in a certain state or in the EU. Those fines are increasing significantly. They're getting a lot more press and coverage, and therefore these organizations are finally starting to do the diligence that they should have been doing all along in these ecosystems, and we're often the beneficiary of that.
Yeah. Well, definitely here. I work in North America, but live in Australia, and definitely there's hardly a week goes by now that there's not a major breach
Exactly.
that you hear on
Yeah.
on the media. So yeah, more and more prevalent. And as far as source of leads, like what's been your best source of these large enterprise clients?
Most of our business, I think it was 90+% last year, was referrals. So generally speaking, somebody will say, hey, we have this problem with our revenue operations ecosystem. We have this problem with marketing automation. We have this problem with privacy within our Salesforce ecosystem. Who should I talk to? Their CIOs, CTOs, CROs, and CMOs generally are not posting that on Twitter. They are asking a trusted, another POC, CMO, CRO, and they're getting referred to us. That's probably about 90% of our revenue. The rest would generally speaking be introductions from Salesforce, because again, we're known at Salesforce for this specialty as well.
Yes.
The interesting thing is, if you look at our funnel, we generate a massive amount of content very intentionally. Every employee here, top to bottom, has a responsibility of generating a certain amount of thought leadership content on the parts of the ecosystem they're experts in. And we're very proud that we can showcase their skills like that. Every single week, this company publishes either a blog post or an ebook or a video or something similar. And that is very intentional. We've been doing that for almost a decade. Volumes increased, but very specifically focusing on that. That does not generate a wealth of new good leads. And in fact, a significant portion of the form submissions are employees that are competitors, which I think says something else, but I feel good about. Note, if you work at one of those competitors, sometimes we'll send out emails that say, hey, looks like you enjoyed this resource, CloudKettle's hiring. So there is that portion. What that content and material does do, though, is it expedites our time to close. Obviously, as the company that helps build these ecosystems, we've built this stuff internally, and we can track very closely and see who's doing this, as we can see in our systems that a certain company has gained an interest in us somehow. That generally is because of a referral, either a friend of theirs, a peer, or from Salesforce. We see them enter the funnel, the system. Then what we can also see is other people in that company very quickly start consuming our resources. And as we get closer to the close date, that accelerates. And so what we know based on all that is that content doesn't generate as great new leads. It generates as leads, but they're not always great. What it does is it closes those leads at a much higher rate for a higher basket in a shorter period of time.
Yes, getting people to like, know, and trust you a lot quicker, which it makes sense. And when you say the videos, are the videos on YouTube? Are they on your
Yeah. Yeah, we host them all on YouTube. Now we'll embed those on our website. We will post some natively within LinkedIn. Generally speaking, they're hosted on YouTube and then placed elsewhere.
Yeah, great. And as far as you're doing it, and once again, I think it's a key formula for the successful partners that I interview here on the show, helping people to write content. Not everyone's great at writing content. Not everyone wants to write content. So how have you gone about getting people within your team to write the content?
A big part of it is cultural. When you start this stuff, when you're starting the company and there's nobody here yet, it's a lot easier than trying to change the culture of your company in the future. When I started the company, there was this expectation that later, oh, there's only two of us, Greg and Ailey. Oh, there's only three of us, Greg, Ailey, and Prague. But I knew we wanted to run that content machine because I had seen how insanely successful it was at other companies I'd been at. When there's only a cluster of you, everybody does have to do it. And then we just continued with it in the culture. And when employees write their annual V2 month, which is like a statement of all the things they're going to accomplish in a year and how we're going to allocate their time, that is in there and it has to be approved. And they know that sometime between now and the end of the year, they got to get that thing done. We'll provide coaching in terms of writing help. They can come to us with ideas. We'll help them flesh it out. We also will change the medium depending on the employee. Some introverts are very comfortable writing an insanely technical document that is a beautiful piece of work.
Yeah.
Others are going to be much more comfortable doing something like a video. So it depends on the employee, and part of making this work is tailoring it to what they're comfortable with.
Yeah, brilliant. And as far as AI, we can't have a content conversation without mentioning AI. How are you using AI to create the content?
We have, interestingly enough, past 3 months, several times reached out to different Salesforce experts, quote unquote, on the internet and said, hey, as a heads up, we believe that this was written by AI. Our thought behind the fact that what you've posted is written by AI is because it's factually incorrect in all the following areas. You should take this down. We are very confident in the future of AI. We are not very confident in the future of AI's ability to generate thought leadership. What we have found AI to be good at is AI is really great for ideation. So as an example, we're going to write an ebook about how this latest Salesforce acquisition is going to apply to, or how the security infrastructure of Salesforce would apply to this latest acquisition. Let's say we want to do a thought piece on that. That'd be a little fluffy for us, but let's just say that that's the theoretical construct. And we've got some ideas around that. We would put some of those ideas into something like ChatGPT and ask it to come back with, hey, what are some suggestions on what chapters for that would be? And it's pretty good at coming up with like, here's a framework of what a good, because you can tell it how many words. I want to write a 2,000-word thought piece on this subject. These are the main areas we want to cover. This is the type of person we're addressing. It's for a very technical CTO audience. Give me a framework for that. And it'll come back with like chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 5, chapter 6. And of those 6 or 7 bulleted chapters, it's just the topic, not the actual wording. We might take 3 of those, but the other 3 are like something we could start to adjust or get some ideas around. It's really good at helping that ideation stage. We haven't found that it's at the point where it can help with the other stuff yet.
Yeah, look, and Sam, I think ideation. The other thing is just making it, for me personally, a better written piece of content. The facts are mine. The ideation's helped, but the facts are mine, and then just get it to write a little better. And we've been using Monica.im, which is effectively got ChatGPT, Claude, all for the same price. It's like a bundle. And we've been using that and then effectively having custom prompts where, they know your audience, they know your tone, and effectively just using those prompts to help do it. So I've got a content writer called Claudia, and Claudia, she's my content custom. I've got a marketing person, etc. So I think augmentation is the way, like you said, it's augmenting. It's not a copy and paste. Yeah, it's so easy to see the tone, and in the prompt you can actually ask it to write like you, i.e., don't write like
yes,
AI,
exactly.
which you can smell a mile away. That's fantastic. And I just wonder, you having a marketing background, coming from I know you had very successful careers in, in the cinema industry and others. Was that a strong determinant as to why you focused on content? You just thought, no, that's the right thing to do. Was it the chicken or the egg?
I would give it the analogy of like, a person can be born with a certain set of skills that might make them an amazing athlete physically. I had the prerequisites for success on that front. I came from that marketing world. I had that DNA. I was already drinking that Kool-Aid. That wasn't necessarily what made me do it. What made me do it is when I was at Radian6, which was eventually acquired by Salesforce, I saw how well it worked. And that was the aha moment. I saw how they turned that content engine into what we just discussed. And for me, it was that. I already was probably attuned to hear that message and believe in it, but that was the aha moment, was that amazing content team, largely built out by David Alston and then accelerated by Rob Begg and John McGinley. That's what that aha moment was.
Yeah. And look, I think there is an intersection between I love how the fact that it's not a blanket approach. It's based upon the strengths and the personality of the team, what they do. And also then you got to overlay that with, where the audience is. And, the audience doesn't always just consume one thing, like we were multi-modem more than ever. We'll talk quickly about the celebration of you have had a successful exit, which is brilliant. And I mentioned that in the intro, but what about, take us back to the 10 years ago when you decided to set up this business and you had that exit in mind. What did you do differently 10 years ago that, to help you get to this point, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the important things to keep in mind is I was working at a startup that was failing. The date I started the company wasn't as up to me as I would have liked. However, I knew I was going to do this in advance of that. So I had been planning and laying the groundwork. And I'd been thinking about it for quite a few years, actually, and was waiting for that right opportunity. And as such, I had been writing somewhat of a business plan, a forecast of what I want this company to be. And I'd been observing what other similar organizations had succeeded at and failed at. And as part of that, I had, and I know this makes me sound like a psychopath now, but as part of that, I had a 10-year plan for what I wanted the organization to be, even before the company was started. And important part of that in the context of what you've asked about is year 10 of that plan was that the company would be acquired. And that was important for me because at the time I was watching two local organizations who I had a lot of respect for and I had a lot of respect for their founders for. They had very successful companies. They were on paper very wealthy. They had done very well. They were highly regarded. But in both cases, as those leaders tried to exit the company and extract themselves from it, the companies fell apart and the revenue engine fell apart because they were the rainmakers. Yes. And what I wanted to ensure was I want to retire someday. I'm still on the right side of 50, so I got a long way to go on that. But what I wanted to know for sure was I would have enough time after those 10 years when we were acquired to cement the foundation of the company within the acquiring entity and build it up so that our employees that were here would have that opportunity to move upwards from a mobility perspective within that company. I wanted to be able to A, have a nest egg that I left with as part of the acquisition occurring, obviously. Yeah. B, know I had a place to kind of wind down my years over a while, not something that's going to happen in the short term. But C, and perhaps most importantly, have something that those employees kept working at, not have the company fall apart and those people lose their jobs when I left. I wanted to ensure that I would have enough time post-acquisition, and at a big company, this is many, many years, this doesn't happen overnight, to build that foundation where they would continue to succeed once I left.
Yeah, great. And I think, that's a perfect segue into the fact that, you've got a remuneration system that supported that, right? Tell us about that remuneration system and how that has helped for, it not to all be about Greg.
Yeah, I mean, contextually speaking, I think an important part of the background is I'd worked at 3 startups. And generally speaking, the DNA of a startup is that you give stock options. That is part of the compensation plan when you are small and scrappy and 5 people and competing against global companies. And so when I started CloudKettle, I knew that I wanted to make that part of the company. And again, culturally speaking, this is something that is easy to do when your company is worth $0, which it certainly wasn't worth anything when it started. Just me, company's worth $0. You're setting up the legal for the company. You can set up the legal to include the fact that you're going to have an employee stock option plan. And over time, we increased the amount the plan was worth. And at the end of the day, the third of the company was held back for the employees. How it worked was, and this changed over time, but the idea that we'd have an ESOP was never in question. And the first two employees, they were members of that immediately when it was established and they were hired. The thought behind that was, and how it ended and matured over time was, if you worked at CloudKettle for over 2 years, if you were a Salesforce certified architect, or you were a member of the leadership team, you were automatically a member of the stock option program. So what we wanted was that any employee who had contributed to the success of the company and its growth, which is you'd been here for over 2 years, you are going to be part of this stock option plan. And we knew we were going to exit the company. And the employees culturally knew we were going to exit the company, because unlike a lot of professional services organizations where this is something nobody talks about, and the founders might be exiting the company, but the employees don't know. In our quarterly meetings where we present to all the employees as if they're board members of the company, because they're stock option holders, we want them to be empowered. We present the financial results of the company. We present where we hit, where we missed, etc. As part of that transparency, we're also always talking about, well, here's where we're at with this acquisition plan. It is 4 years out. It is 3 years out. Hey, we're making major changes in the organization this year because we are about 1 year out. So we knew that was going to be part of it, because I wanted those employees to profit from the fact that they stuck with us and helped make this happen.
Yeah, brilliant, brilliant. And I think that's, and sorry, why did you choose 2 years? Like, you could have chosen 1 year, 3 years, why 2 years?
Well, the largest reason was it's actually an insane amount of paperwork and very expensive legally every time you have to issue options. We knew if somebody had been with us for 2 years, that they were probably going to stay with us for a very long time. So it was just, from a paperwork perspective, honestly, it's somewhat arbitrary. Could have been 1 year, could have been 3 years. 2 years just was the amount that made the legal make sense on doing this, because it's prohibitive.
And as I understand it, you've stayed on with the acquisition. Yeah. So there's some consistency there, but obviously getting a higher multiple is the fact that the business isn't reliant just on the owner, and you set that up from the start. You had some other rules as you sort of set that plan 10 years ago. What were some of those key rules of how you wanted the company to operate?
Yeah, and again, I just want to be clear that these were Greg's rules. These were the things that were right for Greg, not the things that are going to be right for every organization. Now, I'd come off one very successful startup where certainly I was not a founder, but I benefited greatly because Salesforce acquired the company I worked at. Then 2 not so great startups. When it came around to me, what I did know was, and I'd been on the leadership team of these companies and how to do this, I knew I didn't want to raise money. I really disliked the process of going and meeting with VCs and trying to convince them of this vision. But then also what I disliked a lot, be it VCs or private equity, was I had a long-term 10-year plan for the company. And once you take money from somebody, their timeline horizon and your timeline horizon are not necessarily going to meet. And generally speaking, I knew mine was much longer than anybody who was going to invest in us. So that wasn't going to work. So I didn't take any outside money. I was also very allergic to debt. I think part of that comes from my upbringing, but also another part of it just comes from the fact that, I'd been working at a startup that was in a lot of debt, and there's other issues that come with that. Again, the bank starts to have a lot of say in what your timeline was. In running CloudKettle, and this was in the 10-year plan, we would never have debt. We were never going to take investment dollars. We weren't going to seek money from private equity and VCs. Now, that's not to say that that is not the right thing for other companies. I just knew that it wasn't the right thing for me, the type of business we were in, and what our timeline horizon was.
Yeah, yeah. And look, I heard that, and when we scaled and exited our business, we didn't take any money as well, because I think it's hard enough to run a business without getting that interference. Like you said, it's not for everyone. But I think for these service-based businesses, I think that certainly makes sense. The other thing you mentioned in a prior conversation was around customer concentration. So I think you also had a rule around the concentration of clients.
Yeah, we were very focused on what we called the 20% rule and then reduced it to 15. And every year we reduce it further. Essentially, we didn't want any single client to make up more than 20% of our base. And the logic behind that is again, I am a risk averse person, bizarrely for a guy who works for as many startups as I do. I am financially very risk averse.
Yes.
I've got 2 kids, I got a family, I got a lot going on. I got a lot of mouths to feed. And I knew from, again, observing these other companies that I admired, what would happen is they would lose a major contract and they would have to cut a third of their workforce overnight. And I had to do that at startups. I did not enjoy that very much. So what I wanted to do was build a very sustainable machine. And part of that sustainability is if you have more than 20% of your revenue tied up in one company and they have a rough fiscal year, they have a round of layoffs, whatever the case may be, you might lose a fifth of your revenue.
Yes.
Or more.
Yes.
A quarter of your revenue. We wouldn't allow clients to get bigger than that. And generally speaking, that meant trying to grow the rest of the pie faster than some of our bigger clients because we work with, 3 of the 10 largest financial services companies in North America. These are big companies.
Yes.
So we wouldn't prospect internally in them as aggressively as would be natural. But the other part was, just making sure we kept growing the pie faster than they could organically grow with us.
Yeah. I think that's it's really clever. And I think if it looks too good to be true, i.e., going deep, I think that's definitely a risk. The other thing I always believe in, and you sort of, set it up the way that you talk about your ideal client is, target a specific niche or a niche, make sure that's really tight, but then have the diversity in the customer base. I think that's a great offset, and you've done that incredibly well. The last question I want to ask is around the exit. So, you've been in startups, you've been in businesses that have been acquired, you got a lot of knowledge in this, but you did get someone external to support you, Alex from Tequity, who's podcast 518. I highly recommend you listening to that. Why did you do that? Why did you get someone else to help with the acquisition?
So I think part of it is by the benefit of foresight, which is when you have a plan from day zero that you're going to exit a company in 10 years, along the way, you start to gather tidbits of information about how you do that acquisition. I spent a lot of time meeting with different founders, specifically founders in the Salesforce ecosystem. And, I asked all of them a very consistent set of questions about what went wrong, what went right, what would you do different, how did you structure your deal? What I gathered from all those conversations was certainly the founders that used a broker had a better outcome. And it's easy as a founder to say, well, I don't want to pay somebody X% of this total transaction. I could do this myself. Well, maybe you could, but is the person who's done it 20 times in the last couple of years going to be better at it than you? I mean, probably, unless they're really bad.
Yes.
Naturally, they're going to be better than you. Could your time generate more value than whatever that percent was if you're out there selling and making clients happy? Yes. Obviously. If I'm out there closing $500,000 deals, that in aggregate of whatever a diligence process looks like, 6 months, if I'm closing deals like that over a 6-month period, that's more money than we could have paid in that small fraction of a percent. So I knew that. I knew they were going to be better than us at the negotiation. I knew it would allow me to focus more on what I needed to do. And also I knew it would give us the ability to shorten that diligence process because they already have things like the infrastructure and the software behind hosting a deal room. They already have templates. They have a lot of stuff that makes this go much more efficiently. And that was key. Now, we had an amazing law firm and we've been using them for a long time. They have a set of partners who specialize in mergers and acquisitions. Yes. That was very important. We had an amazing accounting firm. Again, they have a group that specialized in mergers and acquisitions. The team of 3 groups, that's what made it work. We needed all 3 legs of that stool. But if anybody is going down this road, you have to use a broker. It's folly not to.
If you're in the Salesforce ecosystem, I recommend you talk to Alex McKay. And like I said, it's 318. And look, I think you've summed that up beautifully. I think the key point there is that you should always view that an acquisition is not going to go ahead, right? And I've seen so many people get distracted by the opportunity acquisition, it doesn't go through, and then their business is worse off. And in corporate, I used to buy billion-dollar businesses for the Coca-Cola company, and we used to always have the view that this is always view it that it's not going to go off rather than it is, and that opportunity cost is brilliant. And the other thing is, like, you go to sell your house, you rarely do it yourself. But the other thing is your clients. Like, your clients bring you in for a specific reason because you've got that specialty and skill, right? It's no different to what your clients are doing. Bringing you in is you bring in an expert and having a brilliant team. And I think overall the outcome is bigger. Look, we could talk forever, Greg. It's been fantastic. But what we're going to do is take a short break to thank our sponsors, and then we're going to come back with some rapid fire questions. Ever spotted your dream client on LinkedIn only to find yourself bogged down in tedious data transfer at the expense of building that critical relationship? Say goodbye to manual tasks and hello to efficiency with Surfy, S-U-R-F-E. Surfy transforms you from a virtual assistant into a sales pro by seamlessly capturing, syncing, and enriching contacts from LinkedIn into your preferred sales platform, be it Salesforce, HubSpot, Pipedrive, Copper, or even Google Sheets, all in one single click. Imagine reclaiming those precious hours spent on data entry and redirecting them towards nurturing valuable connections and closing deals, which we all love to do. With Surfy, it's not just a dream, it's your new reality. Ready to invest your sales time where it truly matters? Try Surfy today by visiting our resource page at paulhigginsmentoring.com/resources and clicking on Surfy. Elevate your sales game with Surfy because your success starts after the click. Rapid fire questions. I'm going to ask you 4 questions and get your rapid fire response. So the first one, what are some of the daily habits you do to run CloudKettle?
I mean, there's habits I have personally, and there's habits that I have in the company. I guess maybe I'll split those. Personally, and this has not always been my forte, but certainly I've seen a significant improvement over, let's say, the last 5 years as I started doing this more and more, is I was very active as a youth. I was somewhat active in my university years, and I became progressively less active as I more and more of my life into rising up the kind of management food chain at different companies. I'd say in the last 5 years, I've gotten back to being as active as I was when I was a teenager. Yes. I work out 6 days a week. I do know, like, very concretely, when I come to work, I am bringing a different level of game if I have worked out that morning before I left. And I also walk 45 minutes to work every day and 45 minutes home in addition to that workout. And for me, they fulfill 2 different things. One is I'm burning off a lot of energy and I'm doing something that I absolutely cannot think about work when I'm doing because it's too hard and you have to be too focused. Yes. You can't do something else. I can't think about work. And then also you're getting all the benefits of the exercise and the hormones related to that, et cetera. And just being in better shape makes you better. The other is that walk to work and that walk home. And I go into the office most of the time, even though we're a remote workplace, I actually enjoy being at the office. By the time I get to the office, I've cleared all my home stuff out. I'm ready for the office. And I've probably thought and processed through a lot of the stuff that I have to kind of plan for during the day. On the way home, 45 minutes. By the time I get home, I've cleared out all the mental baggage from the office and I'm ready for family time and I'm not thinking about what happened there. Now, it's not perfect. You get that extraneous phone call. There's always stuff that's going to happen. But generally speaking, that significantly improved my home life, but also significantly improved my performance at work. Right. So those are 2 home habits. In terms of 2 work habits, I am an insane stickler for booking time in my calendar to accomplish specific things that are not meetings, and also for having a very, very robust task list. I use Apple Tasks for this. You can use anything, but my task list runs my entire life, personal and otherwise. There is nothing that will happen or is going to potentially happen that is not on that list, broken out by this morning, items that are due this afternoon, items that are due generally today, items that are due tonight, next day, and everything goes in that. And I actually use Siri heavily for that. About 13 devices are probably going to ring in a second, but I use Siri heavily for that, saying, hey, blank person's name, please set a reminder to do XYZ. And I would say if you're walking by this office, you would hear that about once every 15 minutes. But that is what's running my entire life, because what I'm doing in essence there is I'm offloading a huge piece of mental processing power to a machine. And so now I don't have to be keeping track of all those things. And again, that's really key, because if you are as busy as I am, if you're running to different time zones the way I am, if you are on the road and flying and suffering from sleep deprivation the way I am, if you don't have that, you're toast. You can't run an operation this complex without having some kind of task manager.
Yeah, great. So you mentioned before the peers, certainly helped you collect information around the acquisition. How do you continue to keep that learning? Like where you go now to learn more about how to grow CloudKettle?
So I'm very fortunate that I have kind of what I call a kitchen cabinet. I mean, not my term, smarter people than me came up with that. But that kitchen cabinet is because we never had investors. We never had any bank loans or anything. I built a group of people who would fulfill that void, essentially, of like, hey, you're not an investor, but you are on my unofficial board as a seat member. That's my kitchen cabinet. I'm very fortunate that those people have also been incredibly successful in their career. They're friends I made along the way when I was working at Salesforce. Many of them still live in Silicon Valley. So I get that heartbeat of what's going on there. Friends in Seattle, New York, Boston, Toronto, other markets, generally speaking. I spend a lot of time with them, be it in phone calls, be it in meetings, be it out to dinner. I spend a lot of time with those people. And sometimes I'm asking specific advice. Sometimes they're asking me advice. A lot of the time, though, I'm just talking to them and absorbing what they're talking about. I don't need to ask them specific questions most of the time. What I'm looking for is their pulse check, their temperature. What are they seeing? What is top of mind for them? And that is helping me.
Fantastic. The last one is, what do you know now after the 10 years that you wish you had known earlier?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that we have time for all of that. There's so many lessons. I think one of the biggest ones was I was pretty good at this, but not as good as I needed to be on this, which was eat the frog first thing in the morning. For me, what that means is there's a lot of unpleasant things about running your business. You probably have to do them first thing in the morning for the meeting start, or you're not going to do it. So when you have to put together that coaching document for an employee who could be great, but is not quite there yet, when you have to have that difficult conversation with the customer about the fact that they've gone beyond the SOW and you need a change order, when you have to do that brutal paperwork for some kind of immigration document for an employee you want to move here, you got to eat the frog first thing in the morning. It's the way it is. And it kind of fits with a general rule that I've always believed in, and I learned from smarter people than me early on, which is you got to deliver bad news fast and make sure there's never any surprises. And kind of the eating the frog part goes along with that.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, you've been listening to Greg Poirier. It's episode 565, and you can find out more about Greg. We'll have his LinkedIn in the show notes, and also cloudkettle.com. But Greg, thanks for coming on and sharing your wisdom today. Very insightful. And please reach out to Greg as Greg reached out to others if you're on a similar 10-year path. Thanks a lot, Greg.
Okay. Thanks for having me, Paul.
What a great interview with Greg. It was a little long, but there was just so much value there. I just let it flow out. Certainly reach out to Greg, introduce yourself on LinkedIn, and also ask him any questions you've got around your plan to have a successful exit. Also share it with your peers because they'll get enormous value. They will think you're a rock star for doing that. You can watch the episode once again on our YouTube channel, Paul Higgins Mentoring, and please subscribe if you love what you see there. And I will see you next time on the Paul Higgins Show. Time for action. Let me know what you implemented from the show. I promise to respond. Plus, get the Tech Consultants Roadmap at paulhigginsmentoring.com/roadmap.